Am I the problem? Is it me? Is it the team members?
Half the people are looking for another gig.
I hire people and it feels like I have increased my expenses. I've widened how many people work with me. And yet I feel like I haven't reduced my workload or my level of mental pressure at all.
If you see people coming to you saying, what do you want me to do? And you give them solutions, you have a buy-in problem. Your best people leave because their voices aren't heard.
I felt pretty solid. I'm a pretty open, pretty vulnerable leader, and I was wrong.
You're probably the arsonist. You're probably setting the fires if everything's a fire. And human beings get a lot more stuff done than human doings 100% of the time.
Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. Today's conversation is going to be so good because I will tell you, going into this conversation, I was pretty confident initially about how I ran and facilitated my team. And after this conversation, Dave humbled me in the best of ways. I was joined in an incredible conversation with Dave Garrison in today's episode. And I have to tell you a little bit about Dave because he is an incredible communicator, has such amazing principles and values of how he runs his work. And Dave Garrison is a chief navigation officer and co-founder of Garrison Growth. He is the author of The Buy-in Advantage, which I will be talking a little bit more about inside of the episode. He is also a Harvard MBA, former CEO of public and venture-backed companies. He is a board member at organizations of monumental size and globally sought-after speaker who has led hundreds of top-rated sessions for organizations and members of the Young Presidents Organization worldwide. What makes Dave's work so different, though, is that he is not just talking about classic leadership and management or just culture perks. He is talking about buy-in, the energy that you see in the stands at a game and where people are fully invested in a common goal versus how to actually bring that into your business. Because right now, which is a stat we're talking about in the episode, we'll dive into deeper, which was shocking to me when he said it. 1 in 3 employees would recommend where they work. 1 in 3, only 1 in 3. And half of the people that potentially are even on your team are already looking for somewhere else to work. So if you are someone who's thinking about having a team, if you maybe already have a team, you're going to want to listen to this conversation. And let me just share some of the highlights of what we covered. We are going to talk about the difference between employee engagement and true buy-in and why your team can seem perfectly content and yet completely checked out. We talk about the 4 things employees need post-COVID in order to buy in and why none of them are actually about compensation or how much they're making, even though most of you are probably assuming that it's always about the money. We talk about the 4 buy-in blockers that are killing team performance, including purpose drift, blind tasks, lone wolf leadership, and one-way communication. We talk about why coming to your team with a fully solved problem is actually one of the fastest ways to kill initiative and what you should do instead. We talk about the slow down to speed up principle and why the scrappy, fast-moving entrepreneur hat that you typically wear actually got you here could be the thing that actually is taking you away from the team that you want, and how the question you ask after someone brings you an idea can determine whether they ever bring you another idea again. Lastly, if you want to know why sometimes what you feel like are your best people are leaving you and why it almost has nothing ever to do with pay, you're going to want to listen to today's episode. So I am joined by the absolutely incredible Dave Garrison. I'm going to stop yapping so you can start to learn all of the insights of this book. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Dave. Dave, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Ambitious Podcast. I cannot wait to dive in.
I am really excited, Kate, and I look forward to learning from you. So teach me.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, guys, before we started pressing record, I was saying to Dave, I have nerded out for the last couple of days on all of his stuff. He has some videos online, obviously his incredible book, which we'll dive into. And I was saying in some ways that I was positively triggered by the things he's going to share with you today, because obviously myself, I have a team, and in diving into his work, there's so much today that he's going to talk about that's going to make you feel seen. And obviously, Dave, as I have here, and we will also, as a side note, be giving away a couple copies of this book. So as a side note, tune in for later in the episode. We'll tell you how to get that. But Dave is the author of The Buy-in Advantage. And this topic, the buy-in, one of the things I would love, Dave, maybe to start with is, since we're going to be talking about buy-in, what does buy-in actually mean to you? Because I think, when people have teams, we hear a lot about management, we hear about leadership, we hear all of these buzzwords that are thrown out. And with that, I'm sure someone listening is thinking, okay, what does he mean when he says buy-in?
Yeah, Kate, a great question and not necessarily obvious. One of the terms we've heard bandied about for years is engagement, employee engagement. And let me start with definition of engagement because that will set the ground level. Engagement is simply how employees would answer the question, would you recommend this as a place to work? And the percentage of employees engaged across North America is at a 10-year low. And about 1 in 3 employees say they would recommend it as a place to work. And half the people are looking for another gig. So buy-in is a different definition. Buy-in is not, would you recommend it as a place to work? Because I might like that you serve Tim Horton coffee and donuts every Friday. I might love what you do and recommend it as a place to work, but I'm not engaged. I'm not bought in. I could be engaged, not bought in. Bought in is, hey, look at the energy you see in the stands at a Toronto Blue Jays game or a Man United versus Man City game or when All Black plays. Look at that excitement in the stands where people are in the collective putting their hearts and their souls and their minds against a common goal, which is my team winning. Look at the Friday night football games. Look at the enthusiasm that people bring. How does that get left in the parking lot on Monday morning? Buy-in is when people bring their full selves and they want to accomplish something greater than themselves together. That's what buy-in is. And we're not seeing it. We're seeing people say, tell me what you want me to do. And they're really nice. Tell me what you want me to do. And then when they leave, they say, oh, I left for a better job. And its boss says it's about pay. And generally, it's not about pay. It didn't have to do with pay at all.
Well, as you said, half, I actually remember you shared a stat that was kind of alarming to me. You had shared in some other media that I had found of yours that 53% of employees have their eyes on another job.
Yeah.
That's kind of alarming for most people who have a team right now to think half my team kind of has one eye looking elsewhere of, is there a better opportunity?
Yeah. And, I know it's not your employees. I know it's not my employees, but I hear that from every entrepreneur I talk to. So if it's not our employees, who the heck is it?
Right.
Who are these 53%? I want their names.
Right.
And so the needs that we know from one-on-one conversations and from third-party research, there are 4 things employees are looking for today in order to buy in. And the 4 things changed as a result of COVID. And the 4 things are, number 1, give me a reason. I need a compelling purpose that we're working for greater than money. Why is this worth doing? Why hang out late on Fridays when I've got other obligations because I care? So 1 is compelling purpose. 2 is an opportunity to learn and grow. That's not to be confused with, I want a bigger position at the company and a corner office and a title. That's not what it is. I want to learn and grow as a human being. The 3rd is, I want my voice heard. I want my voice heard. And I want to work in an environment where I am seen as a human being, not as a human doing. So it's recognition, it's voice, it's greater purpose, it's learn and grow. Those are not unreasonable requests. Unfortunately, through no fault of their own, leaders have never been given the tools to create that environment.
Well, I think there's like an umbrella over all of those, which is actually the level of deep awareness that you can have, because it's not necessarily like when you think about management, like you were saying, there's this belief of, okay, people are motivated by different things. So they either want money, they want status, like these very surface level, they fit into these perfect buckets. And if you give them more money, they'll stay forever. But then all of what you just noted really has a lot of, I would say, like emotional intelligence rooted into it, a lot less of this easy, predictable structure and strategy. It really requires the person with a team to know on an interpersonal level what motivates that person.
It does. And it requires the leader to show up as a human being as opposed to a human doing. And many times we've not seen, where do we learn about leadership? We learn from the people that we worked for in the past, and we learned how they did it. We learn from movies and seeing military leaders, and we learn from going to classes. We learn from what we learned at college or whatever. And that's what we have of leadership. And I've never been exposed to the leadership program that tells you and shows you how to show up as a human being to encourage other people to come along and want to. Except for if you look at like Mark Twain, painting the fence, and his buddy comes up and says, "Hey, I want to paint the fence too." And that's what we need. That's what leadership is.
Yeah. Okay. So someone listening is thinking, okay, how do I know that this is a conversation for me? Which I will say, I obviously have had a team for a while now. And when I had found, a video of yours, I thought, okay, like I felt pretty solid. I feel like I'm a pretty open, pretty vulnerable, leader. And I was wrong because I listened to your stuff and I realized, you know what, wow, there's a lot of opportunity for growth here. And one of the things that got me, which I would love for you to speak to, is, for the person who says, I feel like I have good team culture. I feel like they're getting things done. We don't have a lot of conflict. We maybe have some team who I feel like are pretty stable. They've been working with us for a little while. What to you really is, like, I guess the symptoms or the things that someone could look for inside their company or inside their business that you see are really a lack of buy-in, that they might be able to go, okay, wow, that's happening for me?
Yeah. So some of the symptoms, they're kind of obvious symptoms like turnover.
Mhm.
And so turnover is a symptom that people are checking out. And the polite thing to say is, I left for a better job. And what the boss hears is better job means more money. That's why they left. We have a client who did a survey of 400 people that left their company. And they sent a survey to the homes of those 400 people to say, what allowed you to leave? Pick one, gave a whole list in like 100 choices. Sent the same survey to the person's boss that said, what would have allowed the person to stay or what caused them to leave? 100 questions. And they could pick one. And the bosses almost unanimously, the bosses said it was about more money. The employees, some said, yeah, it was about more money. Most said it was about my boss and poor communications. And so it's very hard to get the feedback because people aren't going to say, you know what, you really aren't giving me what you need, because it comes across as offensive. And when they leave, they're not going to say it's because you were a bad boss, because then they won't get a good referral. So
Right.
you have to look for symptoms. And symptoms are things like, how many times in the last week did people come up with initiative on their own and say, hey, do you know what, Kate, here's a way we could do this differently to really meet an unmet client need or reduce costs or simplify the process? Did they come up with that on their own? Another is focused effort, where no effort is wasted, meaning nobody starts a project, hands it off, and the other person says, I don't have time for that now. It's everybody, the collective is focused and agree on what it is that we need to get done. And then the third is, are people coming, knocking on your door, asking you for solutions? Or it's not, are they coming with solutions themselves? It's, are they coming forward to you and the team to say, here's a situation I face. I'm not looking for you to solve it. I'd like to know about your experience. That's a high trust environment, and that person is bought in. Very few teams will a team member come up and say, hey, I head up marketing, and in the marketing department, we're facing this challenge. I'm interested in your perspectives, because everybody says, oh, well, I'm responsible for marketing, so I'll know what to do in marketing. And that's not buy-in. That's, I'm protecting my area, and I got it. I've got it.
Right. So there's this aspect too of, I'm curious about that, of with buy-in, how does that work if you feel like maybe someone's listening to that and they say, I feel like I have that with maybe half my team, but I
Uh-huh.
don't have it with the other half. And this is
Yeah.
something that I hear a lot with, like I have many agencies that I work with who obviously as a result have pretty extensive teams. And they'll feel like 3 out of the 5 people are really, just
Right.
there for the mission, there for the purpose and vision, but they feel like the others are not, as in their words, committed. And some of them
Mhm.
believe, exactly to your point, they go, oh, it's because of compensation.
Right.
Like, I don't know if it's because of the $3 an hour of a difference that we're paying between person A and person B. And so if someone's hearing that and they feel like some of those resonate for some of my team, But I feel
Yes.
like for other people, I don't see it. How do you kind of decipher if there truly is buy-in, or is it maybe specific person to person versus company wide?
Yeah. So, what we're looking for is we're looking for people to take the initiative and come forward with ideas and suggestions. And the tricky thing for the leader is that it's how you receive those ideas or suggestions that determine whether or not they're going to continue doing that or just say, just tell me what to do, glad to do it. Because every human being brings life experience to the job. So if we truly want to honor every human being, we need to give them an opportunity. We need to give them the opportunity to share their experience, even if they don't have any experience in our industry. They've still got life experience to share. So here's how that typically doesn't happen. The boss comes in really excited. I've been guilty of this. The boss comes in really excited and says, "Hey, I've got an idea. Here's how we can do something differently. What do you guys think?" What are people supposed to say? That's a terrible idea. Or, well, they're going to go, "Hey, interesting
Yeah.
idea, Kate." And they're going to ask you a question chipping around the edges of it.
Mm,
That's what a manager does. What a leader does is thinks to themselves, what I am trying to solve for is increasing our client satisfaction. And I have an idea how to do that. And the leader asks themselves, how do I know my idea is a great idea? And when you answer that question yourself, you get a checklist in your head that my idea is great because it meets the requirements of 1, 2, 3, 4. What leaders do is they say to their team, "Hey, team, I'm really interested in increasing client satisfaction, and I'm interested in solutions that meet the following criteria, the following checklist. Would you please give this some thought? I'd like everybody to come with ideas and to share them at our Monday meeting." And so now you've just enabled them with very specifically what you're trying to solve for and what the elements of a great solution are, which is different than saying, "Everybody, how do we increase client satisfaction?" And you get random ideas and you go, "No, I don't like that one. No, I don't like that one. No, I don't like that one." And so
right.
that's step one. And that's how leaders show up versus managers telling them, "Here's my great idea. What do you think?" Then the second piece of that is when somebody brings you initiative or an idea, the second question you ask them is really important. So the first question always is, "Gee, that's an interesting idea. Can you tell me more about it?" Which is different than, "Oh, yeah, we tried that before," or "I've got another idea," or "I can improve on your idea." That's what managers do. Leaders say, "Hey, can you tell me more about it?" Then they're going to go on and tell you more about it. The second question is the important one. The second question is, how did you know that that was a great idea? And what they're going to tell you is they're going to tell you their criteria. And when you hear their criteria, you can then say to yourself, is there some criteria that they are missing that I would add from my experience?
Right.
And then your question becomes, if you added how long it would take for us to implement that solution, how might it change your idea? And so we have a whole chapter in the book, chapter 6, which is ask questions. It's questions, not answers. That's what leaders do. But you use your experience to fill in the criteria they may not have thought of. And what you're doing then is training your team how to think based on your experience. If you give them the answer, your answer is only going to work in that situation, and you'll just become the answer person. "Kate, what do you want me to do about this? Kate, what do you want me
Right.
to do about that?" So if you see people coming to you saying, "What do you want me to do?" and you give them solutions, you have a buy-in problem.
Well, it's also interesting as you say that. Two things that come up for me when you were sharing how you respond. I think one of the pieces with how you respond is also slowing down enough to be able to take a breath before you respond. I think sometimes especially for entrepreneurs, a lot of them are, even if you have a seven-figure business, you still are a startup. And so because of that, you're fast and you're integrating and you're testing and you're scrappy. But sometimes like your team kind of gets lost in the mix and they bring an idea and you're trying to get there as fast as possible, solve the problem as fast as possible.
Of
You think,
course.
no, that's not it. Let's, move forward with X. But I wonder also how much of this is really the ability to be present and also to just like slow down, not necessarily slow down in how you're moving in the business, but slow down in the way that you're operating as an individual if you have a team, and the way that you're leading, to even catch those moments. Because I would imagine for most people, they're thinking as you're saying that, oh my gosh, I did that on a meeting last week, or I did that on a message someone sent me. They recommended A and I said, no, we're going to do B and here's why. And it's
Yeah.
often, I think, not maybe intentional, but because you're just going too fast.
Yeah. And Kate, that is the human condition. And it's because we're trying to do the best we know how. And we actually have a chapter called Slow Down to Speed Up, because if it's all dependent on you and you're running 100 miles an hour and you don't have time to include others, you become the limiting factor in your business. And, when you talk about speed and just having to go, 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 I happen to be trained as an airline transport, and I'm an airline transport rated pilot. And one of the things that I learned, valuable lesson, is when you have a critical emergency, like an engine out, if you're in a 2-engine jet and you lose an engine, that's pretty important. And so it doesn't mean the plane's going to crash. It just means you need to pay attention. And so you have a checklist, but they teach you the two most important words for you to say when you recognize you have an emergency is, oh crap. And the reason you do that is so you just don't start reacting. The oh crap is, oh crap. Okay. So I need to pull out my checklist and go through the checklist as opposed to just grabbing stuff. And sometimes as entrepreneurs, we just want to grab this handle. Well, what if you grab the handle of the good engine and pull that off?
Right.
What if you accidentally cut off the fuel switch? So slow down to speed up. It's a really important idea.
And you mentioned, even with that, that you feel like you have someone who brings you an idea, you potentially unintentionally shut that idea down. And
Right.
then what you create is, okay, well, either I'm not going to bring solutions, I'm just going to bring questions. And then
Mhm.
what most people experience who are entrepreneurs with teams, they go, I just feel like I've got this team who always needs me. I feel like I've hired people, which is what I hear the most, is that I hire people and it feels like I have increased my expenses. I've widened how many people work with me. And yet I feel like I haven't reduced my workload or my level of mental pressure at all. And one of the things that I talk about is like with teams, the difference between delegating tasks versus ownership. And, to say to someone, okay, to your point, here's your checklist of things versus here's like the outcome you're being given to protect. So, like, this is your baby that I want you to kind of be the leader of in this individual section. But what you noted is also, again, by being conscious of this, allowing people the ability to not have this like self perpetuating cycle of they bring an idea to you because of how you respond, it changes what they bring to you. And now unintentionally you've baked yourself into every single part of the business just as a result, as you said, doing to like lack of being able to slow down to realize if I handle this situation differently, I can actually potentially create system change that will create this aspect of relief for me.
And ironically, it's not software.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
a documented process you're going to train everybody on. It's
Right.
you treating yourself. And the symptom you just pointed out is so typical. When I get before a group of entrepreneurs, I'll say, let me ask you a question. How many of you have ideas? So I did this in Sydney 2 weeks ago. I said, how many of you have ideas that would really change your business? Like, they're great ideas. And like 95% of the hands go up. I say, awesome. How many of you have time on a regular basis to get to those ideas? Almost none went up,
None.
which begs the question, what are you spending your time on and how well are you equipping your people? Because if they're not bought in, you perpetuate that cycle of, I'll just do what you say. I'll be happy. I'll be really nice. I appreciate the paycheck. And thank you for the Tim Hortons on Friday. So we call this delegation trap blind tasks. Blind tasks. And so that happens when you ask somebody to do something, you tell them how to do it. Hey, would you please call back this client and explain to them blah, 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 blah. without the context of what this relates to. How does it relate to our compelling purpose? How does it relate to our strategic objective? How does it relate to what we're trying to do? And what your criteria are for knowing it's done well. Not how to do it. Allow them to decide how to do it. If you've hired the right people, you shouldn't care. And you've given them the right criteria, you shouldn't care how they do it. Because if it meets your criteria, they're going to do it their way. And that's when people start getting bought in.
Well, with that, I'm curious because I think some people have this. I can't remember who said this. It's in a book. I'm going to butcher it, but it really is the basis that every business is the lid of its leadership.
Say
And
that again. Every
business's growth is at the lid of its leadership.
Hmm.
Which basically is that no business can ever outgrow the lid or the awareness, the emotional intelligence, the knowledge, the experience of the leaders who manage it or who lead it. And when you shared that, I know something I hear, and I think many people struggle with is, am I the problem? And so they're not sure, is it me? Is it the team members? So you mentioned something really important there, which is assuming you've hired the right person.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what I see with businesses is that a lot of people are very fast to point the finger of, this team member is not getting the outcome. This team member is not driven. This team member is not a self-motivator, whatever the description may be. And the lid of leadership, or the way that I guess in entrepreneurship, both through experience and also through training, that I've been kind of taught is that it's always me because I hired that person. I led them. I gave them the training or lack thereof. I gave them the clarity or I didn't. I gave them the communication or I didn't. So I feel like for me, I would say I'm more on the lens of I absorb everything because I just assume there's something about this system that I have to change. Otherwise, nothing will change. So I almost never point the finger. On the contrast, I feel that I work with businesses that oftentimes are, it's not me because this team member's fine. So if this team member is not, providing the way that I think they should, it's got to be them. And so you mentioned, assuming you hired the right person. When you work with teams, is there a way or some questions that someone can ask or a way to evaluate how do we know if the disconnect we're feeling in those symptoms that you mentioned are us as the leader? Do you believe it always is the leader, or could it in fact be the individual?
Yes. So, Kate, look, you are part of the system as the leader. So, yes, you are always part of it. It doesn't mean it's your fault or anybody's fault. It's whatever action happened is a result of the system, and you're part of the system. So, yes, you're part of it. Doesn't mean it's your fault, their fault, anybody's fault. However, as human beings, we survive by explaining stuff away and making up stories about the rest. So it's where we have awareness of the stories we're making up versus what the facts are that we really gain insight. We describe this with our clients. We say, what does the camera see versus what sense do you make of what the camera sees? And when you can separate out those two, you can get really curious as a leader. So one example we give is imagine we're back in Africa and we're on the savannah and there's all this tall grass and we see the top of the grass moving. And we've learned that that could be a lion and we shouldn't hang around and go investigate and wait for the camera to show us a lion. We'd better get the heck out of there. And so the story is that that's a lion. Maybe a lion, may not be a lion, but we make up stories to explain stuff for self-protection. They really didn't care. They're always showing up late because they didn't set their alarm. And we make up stories about why people do things. And what the camera would see is the employee came in past 8:30, 3 mornings in a row. And our policy is we start at 8:30. Now, you can make up a whole bunch of stories about why that happened and you don't know. So our opportunity as a leader is just to say, hey, are we clear that our policy is we start at 8:30? And, would you agree that you were not able to make that 8:30 3 mornings last week? Those are what the camera sees. And then you ask them, can you tell me about that experience and how that experience lines up against our policy? And so there's no judgment. There's just curiosity. If we come in and start the school teacher Well, you were late 3 times, and if you do that again, I'm going to put you on a pip. You don't learn crap when you go through that behavior. And if you accept that you could be part of it, you know what? I'm a single parent. My kid is sick or whatever. You don't know what's going on. And so you have an opportunity to understand as a leader what the other person's experience is. And you just might be surprised because usually the story you make up about somebody else's behavior isn't actually what's happening at all. And when you come in guns ablazing, barrels loaded to tell them what they did wrong, you learn nothing. You just tell them, oh, defend myself. Defend. Oh, I'm really sorry, Kate. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again.
Yeah.
But you have no idea what just happened. So it's an opportunity to learn as people see themselves. If you hire the right people and they understand your values and your goals and the measures by which success looks like, then ask them, can we agree this is what happened? And what meaning do you make of that?
Well, I'm wondering, as you say that, how much of lack of buy-in is lack of establishment of what it even means to be bought in, right? Like if someone comes into a team and we have this expectation of certain behaviors, like you said, how does this align with our structure? How does it align with our purpose or our approach? If that is something that you've established and that your team is clear of, then you're able to reinforce how they've met that. Something
Yeah.
kind of, I guess it's back to slow down to speed up. Something that I see is that there's an unspoken expectation,
Hmm.
which is where the leader or the owner of a business has a certain level of expectation, but none that have maybe been actually enforced. There's this assumption that something is obvious. There's an assumption that it should be assumed.
Yes.
And to your point earlier, that usually is routed from the fact that people believe that their team has the same level of knowledge that they do. So of course they see this. Of course they
Yes.
understand the impact. Of course they see the domino.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how much of that aspect of buy-in from team can actually be from the establishment of what that is, and how much of it is the maintenance or the reinforcing of it over time.
So establishment is really important. And as a leader, implicit is usually what happens. Well, everybody should know this. Well, it's clear.
Mm.
And it's a challenge for me to slow down to be explicit about my criteria. And when I am, people go, oh, I didn't know that's what you meant. And so when it comes to behavior on a team, the other team members are going to be the people who enforce the behavior by their reaction to what somebody does. And that's much more powerful than the leader saying, this behavior is not okay or whatever. But what you have the opportunity to do starts way back at the interview process, where you can share a value or your compelling purpose, which is never about money. It's why work matters, and ask people to tell you about a time that they ran into a challenge with that value at work. So let's say your value is honesty. So you can ask a question, just say, hey, I'm really curious to know. We really value honesty. It's an important value at our organization. Is there a time in your work history where you have had a challenge being honest about a situation, or your ability to be honest was threatened? Can you tell me about that? What happened and how did you deal with it? And so ask them about behavioral based questions about the things important to you. And then similarly, if you're creating these things and finally getting explicit, ask your team, what would you expect to see if we had this value or this purpose? What would you expect to not see? And ask them to draw out the behaviors. So it's in our collective minds, not your mind only as the leader, where you get to sit as judge and jury.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking with the companies you work with, do you feel sometimes that you see, we've got this vision and this mission, this purpose, our values, our guiding principles, and it lives in this beautiful yet covered in dust binder that sits in the HR department and as a result isn't integrated? Like, I'm wondering how much of the culture and commitment from team that people desire and the conviction they have for the mission you're going for is a matter of the fact that we established it, we've checked the box, we've got, this kind of handbook they do when they get onboarded, and after that they're in, and how much of it is from establishment and how much of it is maybe from the fact that you have this in some beautiful Google Doc somewhere, but are you living, to your point, are you living and breathing it day to day within your business?
Yeah, to your point, we did a leaders workshop earlier this week, and we asked them on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is all the time and 1 is none of the time, how often do you see your compelling purpose referred to as you make decisions and set priorities? And the average answer was like a 2.5. So the answer is, nah, it's sitting on the shelf. So the opportunity is, if your expectation is we're going to use our values and our compelling purpose, which I want to define in a minute, but if you want to use our values and compelling purpose in making decisions and setting priorities, then we need to ask people, what would that look like? When would we bring it up? How would we bring it up? How do we include that in our decision making? And allow people to identify, your team to identify on their own how they see they can use it, different than you saying, okay, our new policy is we're going to refer to values in the first 3 minutes of our discussion.
Right.
Let them decide.
Right.
Right.
So
And
compelling purpose.
yeah, you'd mentioned mission and purpose. So I hear different terms being used, but the idea here is, for me, compelling purpose answers the question, why bother? Why bother? And, to use icons, Walt Disney said his purpose was creating smiles. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, said he's about putting money back into consumers' pockets, give families more money to spend. And everything that company does reflects that purpose. Their distribution system, where they have suppliers and goods very close to their stores, is very sophisticated. Sourcing from China, very sophisticated, all about saving money. Part-time employees, all about saving money for consumers. And Google's is not about self-driving cars, is not about search engines, is not about free Gmail. It's about organizing information. Their business model is selling data, but they generate data because their business and their purpose is organizing information. And so the question is, can you answer how you're changing lives, how you're changing the world because your business exists? And when you do, that is your why. That's the compelling purpose. And then ask employees, how do they see themselves in it? Compelling purpose is always simple, always 4 to 6 words max, always memorable, and people can see themselves in it and go, you know what we're doing is really important here. It matters. It matters to me. It matters to my coworkers. It matters to our customers. It matters to our owners. And compelling purpose is not how you do it. It's not about making money. It answers, why bother?
Well, to those companies you mentioned who, on their kind of scale of 1 to 5, were at a 2, when you dive into that, how are they rooting the actual purpose then day to day? Like, say if their true purpose is not being demonstrated or integrated, what maybe is something you see of people who are not doing it, and therefore typically a Monday to Friday the purpose is blank. And I feel like for me, the businesses that I work with, there's such a heavy emphasis on the financials of the company and reducing
Yeah,
costs and
yeah,
increasing profit margins,
yeah,
right? So
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, so
that's
I'm
a
curious. I
powerful
like
part.
when you said that drill sergeant side, I'm like, I can see a bunch of different examples of that in my mind, because I think there's just the founder, oftentimes the CEO of that business believes and perceives that their team cares as much about the profit margins as they do. And
Right.
so it's this, money is the center of all of it, or the finances. And yeah, I'm curious, what if someone isn't integrating purpose in the way you would hope them to, weekly or monthly, annually, what typically you see them doing as their North Star with their team?
The North Star is the thing they're asked about every single week. And if it's the profit statement and the KPIs,
Mm.
then that's what they're going to focus on. How does this impact profit? In buy-in world, a couple things are true. One is the KPIs and the financial results are the result of having buy-in and alignment about what it is we're doing and why it is we're doing it. And so everything comes back to alignment around our 3 most important things we're doing, because we say in the book is 3 is greater than 7. 7 is a laundry or a shopping list. 3 is a priority list. So we're aligned on our priorities. We're aligned on the measures. We're aligned on the values. We're aligned on purpose. Then we're all going to do behavior that lines up against those things, and financials will result. If we start with financials, we've automatically eliminated the human element. Here's the irony. Number one expense, you said, hey, you work with a lot of agencies. Number one expense, far and away in an agency, is people.
Mm-hmm.
So are we getting the most from that investment? Not if we don't have buy-in. It's just an expense item that we need to reduce that expense item because our overhead is too high. Overhead is too high because our profit margins are too low. Well, how about if we instead reframed it to say, what would it be like if everyone in that organization brought that same energy that they do to the Friday night football game or the Toronto Blue Jays game or the all black game? What if they brought that same energy to work to address those things we agree are a priority? Your results would change and people would have so much energy and the financials will follow for themselves. You don't need to hammer on, we need to cut costs. Well, who hired those people? Who put those costs in place? It wasn't the people. Come on, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
You hired me. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Not my fault.
I need to take 30 seconds away from today's episode. And no, it is not to sell you anything. It's actually to give you something for free. We're giving away a couple of free copies of Dave's book, The Buy-in Advantage. If you are someone who wants to get a copy gifted from me to you, delivered to your door as a thank you for being an incredible listener of the Ambitious Podcast. The instructions are super simple. There is a link underneath today's episode in the description where you can find the link to the Ambitious Network. If you want to join us inside, you can add yourself to the Ambitious Network, and inside you're going to see a post of me holding this book. Underneath that, there's very simple instructions. You're going to comment a certain word, and we're going to pick from the people who comment underneath that post to give away multiple copies of Dave's book. So if you want to have this delivered to your door, potentially in the next week for you to start diving into, then make sure to head to our Ambitious Network to grab a copy. And if not, you can always find The Buy-in Advantage anywhere that you want to read it on Amazon and stores alike. So without further ado, let's get back into the episode. You mentioned in an episode that I was listening to of yours of the 4 core mistakes that people make with buy-in. And I really resonated with all of them. But I know we've kind of hit on this ever so slightly, which is purpose drift.
Yeah.
Where you talked about the fact that the values and purpose alignment aren't there. So am I kind of getting from that that's kind of like number one, which is the fact that you maybe as the CEO have clarity of what your purpose is, but you don't necessarily have alignment of that purpose throughout your entire team because potentially, to your point, you've anchored the purpose to something else, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Their anchor of purpose is not the same as what you might perceive yours to be, or potentially what you established way back when within that onboarding document.
Right. And purpose drift also happens when you bombard them with priorities. We had a CEO that said, I don't know what my people are doing. They're just not getting crap done. Like, this is not working for me. So we went 2 levels down in the organization. They had a couple hundred employees. Went 2 levels down the organization, we interviewed those managers. They have a title of director or whatever. And we said, hey, tell me about working here. And they said, we get so many priorities that we've got like 20 at once, and we have to pick which ones to do. And then we pray that the CEO doesn't ask us about number 7 because we were working on number 13 and number 4. And so purpose drift also happens when you get bombardment of priorities as opposed to 3 priorities. And we're going to keep after these until we get them done. And then there'll be 3 more and 3 more after that. And that's fine, which is different than my hair's on fire. We got to get all this stuff done.
Yeah.
So purpose drift, one of the 4, what we call buy-in blockers, absolutely unintentional, absolutely real, and absolutely drives your largest expense being your least productive segment of your business. A second one we talked about before are blind tasks, where we delegate something without clear purpose and criteria. What does this relate to? What does great look like? And then allow people to ask questions, clarifying questions, and they get to set the deadline and they get to decide how they're going to do it on their own. And we have trapdoor words that come up with blind tasks. And we see this all the time when well-intentioned team set priorities. We had a team the other day that said, we're going to improve our culture. I looked at that and I thought, great. All right. First of all, how do we find culture? What are we talking about? And two, what does improvement look like? Like, what are the actions we're going to take? How are we going to measure it? What's our time frame? Who's going to be involved? So we'll all walk away from the meeting and agree, yes, let's improve our culture. And everybody has in their mind the way that they're going to do it. And we've never been explicit about what it is we're talking about. So we're not aligned. So the odds of us improving our culture, slim to none. 6 months later, we're going to come back and go, whatever happened with improving culture? I don't know. Other stuff came up. So they're trapdoor words that just fuel this blind tasks. And we find in blind tasks, it's just like, I'll do it. I'm just trying to do the best I know how. As a leader, you come back 2 weeks later and go, how come you're not doing it? And they go, well, I am doing it, or you gave me 20 things to do, or whatever. So buy-in blocker number 2, blind tasks. The third one, also unintentional, lone wolf leadership. AK?
This is me. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens with leaders and teams where we make decisions in isolation with all the best intention. So if the marketing department makes a decision for the sales department and the sales department just ignores it or says that will never work or it doesn't fit into our account plan, that's a form of departmental lone wolf leadership. More often, the leader decides on their own what it is that should be done, or they make decisions for themselves and they just tell people the decision. And people go, okay. You know, in business, we used to use this nomenclature. How many hands do you have? And then we graduated. Today, we call it head count. Like, oh, we wanted somebody's head. How many head count do you have? And all I can see are people planted in the ground with their heads sticking up above. And so what I want people to bring their heads and their hearts and their soul to it. And if you are a lone wolf leader, there is no oxygen for me in the room. It's just you. And so that's an unintentional, you're trying to move fast and move furious, and you have more experience. You want to tell people, but you're not hearing them. So your best people leave because their voices aren't heard, and there's not an opportunity to grow when they're being told what to do. And more importantly, you don't get the best ideas. You don't get any ideas. You get an echo chamber of, Kate, great idea. Yep, we'll make it happen. Thank you.
Well, I was saying actually before we started pressing record, I had shared with Dave that I was diving into his stuff. And I said, you know, I was so excited for today's conversation because I was very happily triggered. And I had said that, you know, on Monday, this upcoming week, I have our normal team meeting and I have our current problem that we're looking to solve is that we are looking to put out more marketing and, you know, increase volume, and yet everyone already is pretty busy, and we're trying to get a, you know, better results with it and also increase volume at the same time. And so I, you know, as we record this, it's Friday. And so I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the weekend. I'm going to sit in my sweatpants with my headphones on and I'm going to solve this problem. And I'm going to bring this beautiful blueprint to the team on Monday. And I'm going to brief them on this is the plan of action that we're going to take. And then before this happened, I listened to Dave's work and I said, what are you doing? Because after I listened to Dave's episodes and he talked about, which is the third of lone wolf leadership, which is the fact of you going, as you're saying, in isolation and solving problems on your own, I realized that when I sat with it, and I had shared with George, I was like, I can't wait to go dive deeper into this book because I need this call out. I need this level of awareness of these because it's not something that I was doing by any means intentionally. I genuinely thought this is me saving my, you know, team time. I'm coming prepared. It shows that I'm not just bringing them a problem, but I'm bringing the solution. And so I thought lead by example, like the intentions, the underbelly of what I kind of associated with was all there. But in diving into it, I now recognize listening to your principles as to that was my perspective of it, but how it is received. And also recognizing that there's a part of this kind of scrappy entrepreneur hat that in order to truly lead, you have to kind of take off sometimes. Because when you are in that initial, you know, for many people when they first launch their business, that, you know, scrappy, I run at the problem is sometimes how you actually got results. And so you've
Absolutely.
got that feedback loop in your head but it may not necessarily be what actually you need to do to take you to the next level. And again, it reinforced for me, one of my things I still feel at times is, oh, so much relies on me. And I go, well, yeah, of course it does. You're taking the weekend to fix this problem when you have an incredible team who could help you to brainstorm how to solve this on Monday. So, yeah, I think the lone wolf piece, a lot of people could resonate with, because I think it's unintentional, but yet so obvious now that we hear it.
Yeah, and there are. Let me put a couple caveats around not being a lone wolf leader. One, there are times when it is really critical that you just say, "Here's what we're going to do," and not get feedback. So the building's on fire. Let's leave the building now. It's not, "Hey, what do you guys think we ought to do? I hear a fire alarm." It's make a decision. Tell them what to do. Now, if that's happening all the time, as our mutual friend George would say, you're probably the arsonist. You're probably setting the fires if everything's a fire. So you need, again, to look at your own behavior. So number one is it an emergency? Make your decision, move on. And then the second thing here is that you need to identify clearly where you are going to make the decision yourself, even if you get other people's input. Don't confuse people. Say, look, this is a decision that's really important. I'm going to make the decision, but I really want your input. As opposed to most decisions and that should happen in one or two decisions. In most decisions, it should be, look, I believe that all of us are smarter than any of us. And that's a principle we call collective genius. So let me lay out the specific issue, the criteria I'm thinking about, invite you to add any criteria, and then let's solve it together. And this came from a story we talk about in the book. And we keep saying book. It's also on Audible if you'd like to listen, because I know 40% of adults listen. And so I learned this from a guy who's a brilliant CEO named Jeff Edison. Jeff came into a strategic planning session with a senior team, and he said, guys, because they were all guys, he said, guys, before we get started, I'm thinking about bringing somebody else onto our team. And I looked at the faces of the people and it was like, what? And I said, Jeff, do you have somebody in mind? He said, yes. I said, okay, before you tell us who it is, did you think about it a lot? He goes, I've given a lot of thought, just like you were going to think all weekend long. Yeah. And I said, okay, tell me what you considered in selecting this person. And he said, I'm looking for somebody who is really smart, somebody who works hard and has cred in the business, and somebody who thinks differently than those of us in this room. I said, great. There are 4 criteria. I wrote them on the board. I said to the team, take a minute on your own. What other criteria would you add? And they added 2 or 3 other criteria. And I said, great. Armed with these 7 criteria, take a minute on your own. Who of all of our leaders in this company would you think about to add to this team? And they thought about it on their own, made notes. And I said, okay, start shouting out names. They came up with about 10 names. And I said, Jeff, do you want to tell us who it is you thought of? And he goes, no. This was really helpful. I got additional criteria and I want to think about it more. And it's to the principle of all of us are smarter than any of us. And so as smart and successful as Jeff is, he realized that his thinking was limited by his own experience, but collectively we cover each other's blind spots. In pilot world, you can see my 6 that I can't see. You can see behind me, I can't see it. So collectively, we are smarter. All of us are smarter than any of us. So lone wolf leadership with 2 caveats if it's an emergency, and be honest if it's a decision you're going to own. And then the 4th buy-in blocker is one-way communications. People feel talked at instead of listened to. And you see this all the time. I watch meetings that are sometimes either like ping pong matches. I'll say something, you say something, I'll say something, you say, and we don't hear each other. We just try to convince the other that we're right, or we talk over each other. And then you wonder why meetings are the biggest waste of time in organizations. And so we really believe in meetings with agenda, where if we're going to solve a decision, the data we need to have an intelligent conversation is handed out at least 24 hours in advance, so we can process what we think about that information and come prepared for a discussion where the discussion is about a very well focused topic and we agree on the criteria. And that makes for a meaningful meeting as opposed to death by updates. Okay, marketing, what's new in your area? Operations, how about in you? Finance, what you guys got going on? And it's like, oh my goodness, don't waste my time. That's all one-way communications. More effective is to say, look, we're going to have a meeting. Everybody, here's the format. Please share your data no later than Friday at noon. I expect everybody to read the reports Friday afternoon. And Monday at our meeting, if you have clarifying questions, let's ask clarifying questions. One-way communications are places where everybody talks, no one's heard, ideas are judged and shut down as soon as they're offered by other team members. No, I got a better idea. That will never work. We don't take time to say, could you tell me more about that idea? So what happens when there's one-way communication? Talk at instead of talk with. Trust goes right out the window and engagement goes with it. People just go, yeah, whatever. I'll just watch the people with the biggest title, biggest egos, yap, yap, yap at meetings while I'm thinking about what I need to get done.
Mm. Well, I'm thinking as you say that, we've chatted about kind of this dynamic of the team buy-in and for yourself as a leader, allowing yourself to be less, I guess, intense or a drill sergeant about the approach, but I'm wondering almost the contrast, meaning a leader who doesn't lead. There's somebody who let's all make the decision. Let's discuss. It feels like everything is constantly in motion and maybe there isn't any of that. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And obviously, when we think back, there's obviously lots of books and a lot of research that can be done around the different types of leadership styles. And even as you said, we saw with COVID, a lot of people went to virtual teams or doing virtual work. And so I guess I'm curious with all you've seen we've got leadership styles in consideration. We've got how things shifted with having virtual teams. There's kind of this belief with some people I talk to of, well, if we're not in person, then we can't get buy-in because we need to be 6 feet away from each other.
Absolutely.
Yes, that I have to hire somebody local because that's what's going to make them committed. And so I think there's a lot that's changed when it comes to team, when it comes to leadership. Like you said, what we know to be, this was the way we were taught to manage, but is that actually the way we should be running team meetings anymore? Maybe not. So with all of that, what are you maybe seeing in the companies you work with? Because you work with very large teams as maybe the next wave of what really is working right now, given all of those changes and just how they've developed over time.
Yeah. And I couldn't tell you I'm the oracle of what works best. What I know to be true is the research from places like Stanford University show that the most effective teams are those teams that are a hybrid of in-person and work from home. And I'll hear people say, I know a really talented young executive who quit Salesforce.com when they were required to go into the office 5 days a week because he said, I don't deal with anybody in the office. I'm talking to clients all day. Why would I spend an hour going each way back and forth to work to sit in an office or occasionally go to meetings that have nothing to do with me? So if you're going to require people to be in the office, for goodness sake, please make every meeting count and no talk at. I would also say for that leader who says, I don't know, whatever you want, what do you think we ought to do? That's awesome, but only if you've built the structure to say, what do you think we ought to do to address this specific issue that we've identified as really important against this criteria? So the sandbox you build as a leader, if you're going to be effective, is focusing the issue and focusing the criteria based on your experience, inviting others to share their criteria, and then give everybody a chance to think about it on their own, as opposed to allowing the first person to shout out the answer. And then we follow that conversation like a drunk on the highway. Try to follow this conversation. People need the opportunity to anchor their own thinking before we have a conversation. And so there's no perfect. It's got to be true. Your leadership has to be true for you. And we always say leaders go last. So as you said on your Monday meeting, you're going to share your solution last. I commend you on that, except when it comes to vulnerability. And every meeting has to begin with a human connection and honoring the human being. So one of the signs we look for in meetings when we evaluate organizations, in the first 2 minutes, did everybody have a chance to speak? And so we'll do that through a couple of different techniques. One is saying, what are your expectations for this meeting? What would make this time a great use of your time? Because you have no idea what is on people's mind. It doesn't mean they're running the meeting. It means you're honoring their feedback and what's on their mind. And then just be real. You know what? We're not going to get to that today. Could we do a follow-up meeting? Could we add it next week? And then the second thing is doing a connection question, a vulnerability question that you answer first. Like, tell me about a time growing up when you joined a new group or a new team. What was that like? What did you learn? How did it make you feel? How do you apply that today? Give people a minute to think about their experience and share their experience as a human being. And if you ask that question regularly, one, you'll realize we're all on the same journey. We've just taken different paths. And two, people will be real and tell you who they are and what they need. When you have that insight, you are able to get the best from them and allow them to give their best.
I really resonate with that because I want to say, well, truthfully, if I give credit where it's due, when I met George, he's a very emotionally in tune person. And so when I met him, we kind of joke that I was very in my masculine energy when it came to just like leading, yes, with team, but also just in the business in general. And so I didn't at that point have any vulnerable shares. I didn't really ever put myself on the stake. It was always just, you would expect other people to share, but I wasn't the one to share. And so there was definitely like the team still got objectives done. They still had tasks being managed, but there was like an emotional disconnect. And now I feel like we are talking as much about what their personal lives are in the sense of like to your point, what happened this morning, what you navigated this weekend, just who they are as people and what they're experiencing. And I feel like there is a camaraderie, there is a culture that shifted massively once I was able to say, hey, here's where I'm actually at, or here's how I'm actually doing this week, versus I think my perspective previously had been, to be an authority and to be taken seriously. And, all of these old scripts of what leadership looked like. Once I released that, I've never been closer with the people I work with. And also with that, never had more trust. I feel like they also have more trust because they recognize I'm not just another person in the machine here. I am, or like a piece in the machine. I'm truly seen as a person inside of what we're doing. And I would say to your vulnerability piece, I really resonate with that because I used to, start a meeting being like, okay, great, let's dive into it. Let's get into the material. Let's get into the updates or all of that. And taking a moment now to just check in with people and how was your weekend and what was like a personal win and a business win from the last week that you guys want to share with everybody. And sometimes it's, I ran for the first time in 6 months and I feel really good about it. It has nothing to do with business, but I realized that shifted things a lot in just, feeling the connection piece. And before, I don't think I really connected enough or attributed enough value to what that does to what a lot of, people in the management perspective or the leadership perspective look at, which is if you as the owner, you're like, I want to grow and I want efficiency and I want productivity, there's a person that is underneath all of that. And so I think the question I kind of simplified it to for myself is, do I feel like in a given week, I am as acknowledging of the person within this as I am the process that they're designed to own? And I think that
Awesome.
kind of became an evaluation. I saw a massive shift when it came, like you were noting, to meetings and just to overall communication of just having dialogue versus I need this done.
Awesome. And Kate, I think it's important to recognize it is a tricky position for female leaders because they've also heard the don't be emotional message. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I hear guys in businesses like real estate say, don't be emotional. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
you know, the interesting thing is the human body is physiologically wired with three brains. There's the brain in our head, the brain in our heart, and the brain in the gut. And you know this because people say, I have a gut feeling, or this really makes my heart happy, or my heart aches. You know you've got three brains. And in school, they beat two brains out of us and pretend there's one right answer. What's 2 plus 2? There's only one answer. What's the capital of France? There's only one answer. And we go to please the teacher. And that whole model is not useful because there is not one answer. There are thousands of answers. There is perhaps one best fit based on our common criteria and what it is we're trying to solve for. And listening to your heart and listening to your gut and being a real person is important. And you have the opportunity, you don't have to do anything. You've got the opportunity to overcome the story of, I can't be emotional. Emotional is human. It is the human condition. One of the questions we ask on meetings, the second, third, fourth meeting of the week is, okay, what's something you're celebrating personally and what are you celebrating professionally? Because it puts you in the mindset. First of all, it takes you out of your task list. Second of all, it puts you in the mindset of remembering there are things worth celebrating. And when I hear your personal celebration about your kids, about your pet, about going running for the first time in 6 months, I get to see you and you get to see me. And that's why leaders go first when those questions are answered, because the vulnerability you show, which is what enables trust, is the vulnerability other people are going to show. And if you had a really crappy weekend, call it out and say, I was really disappointed because this thing I was really looking forward to went turtle on me and it was a disaster and I felt like crap. Call it out and people are going to identify that's happened to me too. And you show up as a real human being and they'll show up too. And human beings get a lot more stuff done than human doings 100% of the time.
I love it. So good. It's so good. Okay, Dave, we need to talk about the buy-in advantage. Obviously, we will be giving, we have an incredible community that is connected to this podcast that people can join for basically resources, giveaways of things like this. But for someone who is either going to get a free copy of this or wants to right now after listening to this conversation says, you know what, I don't want to wait for Kate to ship it to me. I'm going to order it for next day delivery on Amazon. The buy-in advantage, if someone is going to read this and to really apply everything inside, is there kind of anything you would want them to know about how this could really shift them, but also what this could do to really shift their business?
Yeah. First of all, I would not suggest that you apply everything inside. I suggest that you read it, analyze your situation, but then importantly, ask others how they perceive the situation, and then pick one or two things as priorities and try those things. We have, if you go to buyinbook.com, BUYIN book.com, we have a free assessment and you can take your own assessment on where buy-in is. And then we have an assessment for teams that's free where you can have your team take an assessment. And that begins the conversation and applies the idea of all of us are smarter than any of us. So rely on your collective genius, your team's view of the experience to identify where to begin, and then pick one or two things and try them and see what happens. And then go to the next two things. They'll all be there. But we've shared the ideas in the book, not because I'm an expert in this or that's what I did. It's what I learned from great leaders. It's lessons I learned from watching great leadership. My friend Tom Leppard, who's chairman of Austin Industries, who was former mayor of Dallas, Texas, who's a great leader, said, I wish I had this 20 years ago because I would have led differently. And that's the way I feel about what I learned from all these amazing leaders that we feature in the book.
Well, one of the things that I feel like I noted is that if I could distill it down, it feels like small incremental change.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's this compound effect that can happen from the integration of these principles. Because I'm thinking for the person who is listening or reading, let's just say you only shift, like as I did, I kind of had before I dove into Dave's stuff and I had after, which was the morning, Monday meeting was going to be happening regardless. One had a certain agenda and one had a very different agenda. And I know that just even me taking that, okay, wow, I'm going to shift how I approach things this week. is one step and a level of awareness now that not only number one freed up my weekend, but number two allowed a lot more team connection and camaraderie and collaboration than me staying in that pattern. And that's just one tiny little thing that you shared. And if I think about how that's going to impact future Monday meetings or future problems, there's a compound effect, like just having these principles and this level of awareness. And I think even, as you said today, that the symptoms of how this comes up, or the lone wolf leadership, or purpose drift, like even if you take one or two of these pieces and you integrate them, those over time will have a massive impact on not only your experience within your business, but also the experience of the people that you work with. So I feel like it is meaty in the best of ways because there's just so much you can dive into and apply. And I know for the people who listen, because they're very similar in wiring to me, I'm like, dive in, make all the notes, go integrate it all. And we'll take Dave's advice and we will take a nugget or two. We will bring it to our team and use that to kind of integrate them a piece at a time and allow the compound effect to kind of take advantage. So I love it. The buy-in advantage. Dave, thank you so much for today. This was incredible.
It was my pleasure and a privilege, Kate. Thank you. I'm
Yeah, of
glad to be
course.
here. I'm always available. If somebody wants to grab a coffee, reach out. You can find the contact information at buyingbook.com. Reach out. Let's chat. I love to learn from leaders and what works and doesn't work. And Kate, I'm delighted, and I can't wait to hear about your Monday meeting and how people contribute and recognize all of us are smarter than any of us.
I love it. I love it. So good. Dave, thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. As I said, we will be giving away a couple copies of the Buy-in Advantage inside the Ambitious Network. So if you are someone who wants to snag a copy of that, join and go into the community. If you're not already in there, you can message underneath on this episode in the comments of Spotify, or also to us on Instagram with the word ambitious, and we'll get you inside to snag a copy of Dave's book. But also if you are someone like myself who's like, I'm going to potentially start reading this tomorrow, then you can either go to Dave's site, as he noted, or buy wherever you buy your books. So with that being said, we will see you guys on the next episode. And as always, stay ambitious.